Burke. I'm a retired homicide detective from the Dayton Police Department. In my 22 years in homicide in Dayton, I was directly involved in over 800 homicide investigations. I grew up on the east end of Dayton. I went to Dayton public schools. In high school, we'd all go and watch the football game. And just unexpectedly, someone pulled out a knife and stabbed one of our coaches to death for no reason. I'd never seen anything like that before, and I was kind of intrigued by it. Years later, I knew this police officer, and we got to be friends, and one day he said, "Why don't you come and ride along with me for a night? You might get a kick out of it." And that got me hooked. The next day, I'm like, this is what I'm gonna be. And I became a homicide detective. Homicide is the gold level of police work, bar none. We're the CEO of these investigations, and it's a great responsibility.
Detective Burke is a hard worker. Many times I would laugh because he would seem to be doing 18 things at one time, answering the phone, talking to somebody. He'd always call the victims' families. He knew it was important.
Doyle Burke had the respect of all the police officers, supervisors, everybody. He was very, very good with people, and he was sincere with it.
It's not easy, but if I had been an engineer, I'd have been bored to death. There's no doubt in my mind. This is much better. The day we got the call, we had a Klan rally, which is a rarity in Dayton.
The Ku Klux Klan is a white supremacist organization that came into being in the 19th century. They ruled in their minds the master race. It advanced through the country like a pox. It tends to attract the dim-witted who are easily influenced.
They have a First Amendment right, but they're bringing an awful, ugly message that we don't want associated in any way with our city. It's a city that was, at the time, probably 40% black. Most people were not happy to see them.
And that is potentially violent. So they had hundreds of Dayton police officers to contain what was thought to be, maybe 100,000 people. They left me and my partner as the only two guys not in uniform in case we got a homicide. So they go, "Well, you've got a homicide." And I said, "Oh, was it the Klan rally?" And they go, "Oh no, we got two people that are beaten to death inside Sloopy's bar."
So it still could be the case that this was racially motivated. But he wondered about that. Burke is a smart guy. The real key to any investigation is to keep an open mind.
The Oregon District is the main entertainment district. You had a number of bars, so if you went to one and it was crowded, you could just wander down to the other.
The flagship in that time was Sloopy's. When I got to the scene of Sloopy's, I talked to Officer Keller, and he described to me the bar was not open at the time, that we had two victims. The side door where we went in led to the kitchen area.
The first victim, they check his wallet, and detectives identify him as one Robert Napke, 38 years of age. A relatively young man.
Robert Napke was my first concern because he was closest to the door by the walk-in freezer. He was beaten in the back of the head 17, 18 times.
The killer hit him repeatedly with this instrument, whatever it is. A shell fracture of the entire skull. This is a classic case of overkill.
In cases like this, you have what you physically have, and then you have what it means. So yes, we have a dead guy. He's been hit on the back of the head with something, and he fell face first. That's static. But what does it mean? It means the suspect was behind him. It means he probably opened that door for him, and he knew him enough to where he trusted him enough to walk in front of him. I'm convinced to this day, Napke was totally caught off guard. The suspect just beat him to death. The other victim was laid out on top of his coat. And his injuries were identical to Robert Napke's. He's beaten to death in the back of the head. The autopsy would later reveal that the second victim had 19 blows to the head, very violent.
Keller then points out something to Burke.
And there was a wallet hidden behind the toilet tank.
The wallet belongs to our second victim, Frank Ferraro, a man 65 years of age and the husband of Mrs. Ferraro, the 911 caller.
His wallet had all his ID and $211 in cash.
Detectives, I believe Frank must have had a hunch, I'm gonna get robbed. So he removed his personal wallet, put it behind the toilet so the robber wouldn't get his wallet.
We went to the office area. And in the office area was a hammer. We could see that it had some blood on it and what appeared to be hair on it. Hopefully we can get some DNA, fingerprints, whatever off of it.
Obviously, this is our weapon. Humans are fragile. They're damaged easily. You've got a hammer in your hand and you are at the edge of rage. You are a killing machine.
It'd be silly to say that things like this don't bother you, but you have to go to kind of the greater good. This is what I do. And yes, this is horrible. How much worse will it be if we don't get who did this?
So Detective Burke speaks to Grace Ferraro, the victim's wife. Grace explains her husband was an Army veteran, 44 years in the Postal Service, decided to want to continue to work. His sons owned Sloopy's. Dad wanted a job. The sons decided to provide him with one. Let him be the day manager. Let him keep the books.
His wife, Grace, loved him with all her heart and just could not understand how her love of her life could be taken away.
Robert Napke was relatively young, in his late 30s. He was known in the Oregon District by everyone. He was the general laborer guy. He was a jack of all trades. No one had anything bad to say about him.
My name is Jim Napke, and I am Robert Napke's brother. Robert was the fifth of 9 children. He was someone who could easily make friends. A lot of people wanted to be around him. Robert was very trustworthy, and he expected you to be trustworthy also. At Sloopy's, he was in charge of janitorial, custodial type work. Robert, as far as I know, didn't have any problems or issues working at Sloopy's. He wanted to keep his life pretty simple. As long as he had his friends, he was happy with that. With Robert's death, it was after midnight, and my sisters called me and told me the news he had been beaten to death. We were all shocked, what happened. Nightmare.
It's always difficult to come to grips with what's occurred. Neither of the families had a clue why these 2 men were killed. Knowing that it's Dayton, that there's a Klan rally, it's right after St. Patrick's Day, I knew there was going to be a lot of work to figure out who did this just by virtue of what it was. So my partner and I are on scene at Sloopy's. Got a page from dispatch. I called in. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, right? Like, okay, we'll take care of it. There you go, got another double homicide.
Double homicides are rare. Double homicides within an hour of each other are incredibly rare. So now Burke has another complication. What if they are connected? Do we have somebody roaming around the city killing people? What are the odds of that? I would say they'd be very high. Detective Joel Burke is working a double homicide at Sloopy's bar. And he's just learned of yet another double homicide 15 miles away in a convenience store.
My partner, he's like, this is a joke, right? And I'm like, no, it's not a joke.
What do we do if this is an ongoing event and we're going to keep finding bodies?
With these two double homicides occurring like that in the same time frame, until you've got a suspect identified and cuffed, everything's in play. Anything's possible.
When Burke hears about this other double homicide, he's not going to rely on someone else's opinion. He's going to rely on his own. He wants to go to that scene and look for himself. What is the same here?
It was a very small mom and pop carryout. Both of the clerks had been shot and killed. Cash drawer was gone. I mean, it was an obvious robbery.
Someone comes unstuck and they open fire. Burke is hopeful there's not another one in the next hour, but we'll see. It puts the pressure up. There are similarities in these two cases, but the most important thing is the manner of death. They were both shot to death with a handgun from some distance away. Not the same as beating somebody to death right in front of your face. It's a different kind of crime.
The way things were done up at the carryout led you to believe they weren't connected, and ultimately it was not related.
Later, 3 men were arrested for that double homicide, and all of them were convicted. And there was no question it had nothing to do with Sloopy's bar murders. So now Burke is back to Sloopy's bar to talk to the night manager, who relieves Ferraro when he leaves during the day.
I said, I need a list of all your current and former employees. He goes, fine. But you know, everybody does everything. What are you talking about? Everybody does everything. He goes, the Oregon district, every bar here works with every bar here.
It's an informal alliance.
If somebody was running out of a certain product, or somebody was low on cash for whatever reason, a different bar owner might help them.
Sloopy's is the biggest, and TB Hopkins is the second biggest. So the employees from Hopkins routinely come over to Sloopy's because it's very close.
One of the other things we learned is now the Oregon district is famous for its Halloween party. What I didn't realize is St. Patrick's Day was right behind it. That was the #2 moneymaker.
St. Patrick's Day is a unique American holiday. Everybody gets toilet-hugging, snot-licking drunk, and they'll stay that way for a week, both in advance of, the day of, and a week after. The bars make 6 months of their income in about 2 weeks.
When you were drinking in those bars, you were probably paying with cash, because it was a cash business.
The manager was a wealth of information. We had a lot of questions.
One key to any investigation is to establish a time of death. The last person to see him alive, Ferraro, was his wife. She said her husband left that morning at 5 a.m. to go to the bar, clean up. At 6 p.m., he's dead. That's 12 hours later. So to narrow that down to a period of an hour or two is very significant.
Obviously, we couldn't let the manager into the bar. We have to preserve the integrity of the scene. We had taken some photos.
Burke is experienced, and he's smart.
And I show him the bar stools on the tables, the office, and things I thought he could get an idea with what they were doing.
Burke says, how far along were they in the cleanup?
And he goes, oh, they're nearing the end, so 10, 11 o'clock.
So the killer commits this crime between the hours of 10 and 11 in the morning.
So that all fit, and that was very helpful. And then he's looking at the office, he goes, hey, our safe is missing. He goes, there should be a fire safe that sits right here.
The manager tells Burke, there's a safe here where the night manager, me, puts the receipts in the bank bags. And when Ferraro comes in the morning, he takes the bags to the bank.
Whoever did this thought that the safe would be stuffed with money because of St. Patrick's Day. And it would have been, but Frank had already made a deposit. So now we got a safe that's missing. I'm like, how big is this safe? He goes, it weighs about 150 pounds. I said, so one guy could carry it? He goes, oh yeah.
So now we're faced with another problem. Is this a crime of opportunity after the murders? Or a man is walking out? Well, hey, that's a safe, it's not that big. Or is this purpose of this crime the theft of this vault? Then how do you explain the savagery of the attack? We don't know, we weren't here. That's the disadvantage of being a homicide detective. You're never there when you should be. Burke knows the likelihood of finding this safe is slim to none. But nevertheless, he puts out a bolo on it. He's thorough. You have to be.
You work every case to its most logical conclusion. I was at my desk looking through things, trying to solve this, when I got a phone call from Chris Ingalls, a reporter for one of the local news stations. He says, I've got a letter I think you need to see. It may be related to the Sloopy's homicide. I said, great, bring it on down.
So he comes down and shows Burke a letter addressed to him at the TV station.
There was a return address from the devil in hell. And it basically was a one-page note about how they had killed the two people at Sloopy's because they were mad because the city let the Klan rally come into town.
Dayton police lie when they say the killings are not related. Maybe not directly, but in rage.
I personally beat the young stupid one by the walk-in freezer, hit him a lot with one of my boys' tool. The old guy in the toilet, he died.
Maybe next time KKK want to come to Dayton, you say no. Maybe families ask, where was my police protection?
I tell them they protect the crackers at Rally. One day we really will overcome.
Street talk, mistakes, misspelled words.
There are pieces in here only the killer would know. The old guy in the toilet, Mr. Farrow died in the men's room. About the young boy by the freezer, that's the prep area.
But one most critical thing, he says a hammer. Why is that so important, you say? Well, because they never told the public what the weapon was. Yet this guy knows it's a hammer.
And we just thought this has got to be from the suspect.
Interesting. Who is our author? There's been an angry letter sent to the press alleging this murder is based on racial hatred.
And they had killed the two people at Sloopy's because they were mad because the city let the Klan rally come into town.
We tend to think of the Klan as a Southern phenomenon, but when they were at their height in the 1920s, a lot of the biggest states for the Klan were actually in the Midwest. There was segregation everywhere. In Dayton, we had segregated schools, we had segregated swimming pools, so that existed. up here.
They came here to incite to violence. They came here to spew their rhetoric and try to make people mad and try to get those people to do something.
It was that morning of the murders, so that fits. Somebody incensed over the meeting and then goes off and kills people.
We had to at least theorize that maybe this is a retaliation for the Klan. I mean, what a coincidence.
Burke needs to find out what happened at this rally, so he finds the officers that were assigned to the detail.
I knew we had over 200 officers on duty there, and I talked to them. They go, I think we outnumbered the people there. Some people showed up, but we're not in the numbers that we were expecting, so it was kind of a wash.
So now the only fact we have is that somebody wrote a letter to the press and knew things that had never been released to the public. The letter is undoubtedly from the killer.
Who would send such a letter was the first thing that got into my mind. And then the smarter part of me kicked in and I said, could the guy that did this actually be dumb enough to try to do this to throw us off?
So Burke has decided this racial motivation is just probably not accurate at all. There's no evidence to support it. So now we're back to square one.
It was one of these paperwork days. I was at my desk looking through things. We got a call that a safe had been located behind one of the hardware stores.
Well, would you look at that? The safe was actually found, and someone pried it open.
It was a Sloopy safe. There was no doubt about it.
Now we've got something solid. We have an object that this person who's responsible for the crime touched and had in his possession.
So our evidence technician took it to the crime lab and did an analysis on it.
In this case, the safe, they brought it in. Now, laboratory, what can you tell me about this? What did they use to break into it?
A 150-pound safe is more like having a secure lock on your closet. They don't require sophisticated effort to get into. They don't require somebody who knows how to manipulate a combination lock. All they require is force.
The lab people now take a look at it and they say, oh, I see, here's the Jimmy marks, and we're documenting those things. The safe, it didn't have fingerprints on it, but on the side of it, there's red paint.
It looked like a paint transfer, like the safe impacted against something that was painted red. It's anyone's guess at this point, but right now it's not helpful. What Burke needs is a suspect. Sloopy's Bar is such a landmark in this neighborhood of bars that people are still discussing this case days later. It is the talk of the town and of the press.
We had Crime Stoppers. We, of course, said, you know, with everything on the news, anybody with any information, call in about anything. I thought we would solve this, but you don't know. You just don't know. It's tough to take. But every time we thought we were at our wits' end, we always had something that would pull us back in the right direction.
Tips start to roll in, and several anonymous informants say that a guy named Edmund Emmerich III should be looked at by the police.
Edmund Emmerich III was a bouncer.
He worked at T.B. Hopkins Bar, which was practically next door to Sloopy's. Of course he knew Frank Ferraro and Robert Napke. He dealt with them all the time.
Now, you're not convicting a guy back murder on that. But it makes him somebody you need to talk to.
He had a reputation as being a hothead. If someone mouthed off to him,
He would beat people half to death.
He was fired by the bar because he just was more trouble than he was worth. Now, Burke immediately thinks, hot temper, you say? Well, we are certainly looking for one of those. Burke decides to run Emmerich's name to see if anything comes up.
And lo and behold, Edmund Emmerich III, he was wanted on the traffic warrant.
Now Burke has something to work with. Let's see what you have to say for yourself, Mr. Emmerich. Now Burke is convinced he is on the right track. Now this gentleman, Edmund Emmerich III, has a traffic warrant.
So now we had him dumped in our lap.
Doyle was already legendary when I met him. He had that reputation to work a confession and just gradually trap them with their own words, and he was exceptionally good at that.
My thing is, everything's a battle, and I don't want to lose. I mean, I go into the room thinking, if I come out of here with nothing, they won. And I don't want them to win, so I want to get something.
Burke says he's investigating a double murder at Sloopy's and asks Emmerich, do you know Frank Ferraro and Robert Napke? No, I never heard of him.
If you worked down there, you had to know both those guys, especially Napke. He was in every inch of that Oregon district, 7 days a week. Everybody knew Robert Napke.
He asks Emmerich where he was on March 19th. Now, this is 9 days after the date the bodies were discovered.
And he laid out everywhere he was, hour by hour by hour. And he started at 10 o'clock, I was at my dad's. Then I went to the Patterson Pony Cake and got a 6-pack of beer. Then I went to the Patterson Park Laundromat and got my clothes. I'm like, you pretty sure about all that? Yeah. In my mind, I'm like, oh, this is good. Nobody can remember this. No one. Why would you?
Emmerich is telling Burke a story as if he's rehearsed the story before. However, being suspicious doesn't give you the right to arrest anybody. He lets him go.
We went to the Pony Keg, and we felt like idiots, but we said, look, I know you probably sell 10 million bottles of beer in a week, but 2 weeks ago, a guy came in, bought a 6-pack of beer in the afternoon, and we showed him a photo spread. And he goes right to Emmerich's photo and says, yeah, that's him. He said, look at me and look at the clock and remember that I was here.
Now, the explanation of him being there is very bizarre, but the fact remains he was there. So that 12 to 2 checks out.
And we went to the laundromat, it was even better. The lady said, I remember him. Here's his name. It was around 2 o'clock.
She said this same fellow makes a huge fuss about the fact he has to have this laundry.
He had 31 pounds of laundry, which is an immense amount of laundry. And she goes, he parked far away. And we're like, why don't you just pull it up again? He goes, no, I'm good.
Now, what is he doing? He's drawing attention to himself by raising a fuss. The clerk tells Burke she thought it was just kind of odd the way he acted. So I kind of looked out the window to see how he was going to get all that clothing into this car. Burke asked her, what kind of car is he in?
She goes, it was a little red Dodge Daytona.
Well, my. Red, like the kind that can produce a paint transfer on a safe. Mr. Emmerich has a great deal of explaining to do. However, Mr. Emmerich, he's been giving alibis all day long, and so far, they've all checked out. The last stop for Burke is Emmerich's father. Now, they strongly believe these people were killed between the hours of 10 and 11 in the morning. Emmerich said he was with his dad all morning, the most critical part of his alibi, which is the time frame of the murder.
We made it clear to Emmerich's father, you know, we're homicide detectives and we want to talk to you about your son, Eddie. And he was very cordial. I want to know if we want to have some coffee. And we talked for a while. He couldn't remember if he was there or not. And then he asked who we were again. And we told him. And then he asked us if we'd like to have some coffee. And it was clear that he had memory problem, maybe some dementia.
Burke believes Emmerich intentionally used his father as the final nail in his alibis, knowing that his father could not confirm nor deny that he was there.
He couldn't remember who we were, much less, you know, whether or not Emmerich was there on the 19th.
So his plan blows up in his face.
Once we showed the alibi was just crap, even though we now have a tremendous amount of suspicion on Emmerich, you have to have probable cause. So we had Emmerich's car towed to the crime lab.
They look at the car.
oh my God, there's a whole gray scratch area on his vehicle. That's a clue. So we do an examination of the paint, number of layers and the color, do a side-by-side comparison and a chemical analysis.
Ken called me on over that they had some results.
These marks were made by that corner of that safe that was rubbed across this vehicle.
So now we had hard physical, forensic, scientific evidence that tied Emmerich to these two murders. There's no way you can explain that safe being in your car. It's irrefutable. In this case, it matched, and Emmerich was our man.
Police work is 1 foot in front of the other. It's paperwork by the metric ton. And yet, at the end, when you finally assemble this tonnage of information and you're going to go get your man, there's nothing better. Nothing. They go to Emmerich's house.
You always use an abundance of caution when you're going after a murder suspect, especially somebody this cocky and this brutal and violent.
Once you've killed once, after that it's only numbers.
We could see him looking out the front window. The good thing for us is this wasn't our first rodeo. We had officers in the back, so he's not getting out of the house.
And then you announce, police, open the door. Another knock, another announcement. Open the door, answer is no. Battering ram, goodbye door. Mr. Emmerich, let's see how the rest of your day is going to work out. Police open that house like a tuna can. We're going to scoop up Mr. Emmerich and haul him away.
We look through the house. We go through every room. He is in that house, but we can't find him in that house. And that's eerie because he's a murderer. He could jump out with a knife, who knows? So now we have to fine-tune the search. And as we're combing through the basement, we see a cellar door. And we saw that and we're like, that's got to be it.
And there is Mr. Emmerich, crouched like a little baby with his hands over his head, announcing, "Don't shoot."
There's a great deal of satisfaction when you know you've got the right guy. Well, I would have loved to have another crack at him in an interview room, but I don't think any of us felt that was ever going to happen.
And this man, Mr. Emmerich, he doesn't want to make a statement? Fine. Confessions are very rare, but if you don't have a case, don't arrest him. So, what motivated Emmerich to do this? Is it just his temper? Well, that certainly helped. But Emmerich was desperate. He'd been fired from the job he had. He had no money.
Emmerich was familiar with the Oregon District and the fact that there would be a lot of money after St. Patrick's Day. He knew Sloopy's was the biggest bar at the time, and they had money, and he was going to take money.
What he doesn't know is that morning, Ferraro took the proceeds from the night before to the bank night depository. Emmerich thought he'd get all this money. Didn't happen.
That morning, he knew there'd be guys in there cleaning up. He knew one of them would probably be Robert because that's what Robert did.
Emmerich goes to the side door entrance. Napke thinks, well, it's Emmerich, assuming he's there for business.
I don't know if he went in there with the idea of, I'm going to have to eliminate any witnesses that I find. But they had no chance.
We speculate. Emmerich grabs a hammer out of a toolbox. and bludgeons Napke to death. And because of his temper, he goes crazy.
The autopsy revealed there's no defensive wounds. Robert never even saw it coming.
We theorized that Mr. Ferraro heard the commotion and thought it was a robbery, ran into the men's room, stuffed his wallet between the toilet tank and the wall, turned and came out of the stall, and is confronted by Emmerich.
Frank was told to lay down there. Probably said, I'm not laying on that floor.
Ferraro said, "Let me use my jacket. The floor is filthy." And he let him do that because it took the fear away. That he's just going to lay down or he's not going to hurt me. And then he attacks him and kills him.
It was a horrible way to die.
Frank Ferraro had 19 blows to the head, and Robert Napke had 18.
So after he has eliminated these two potential witnesses, he then gets the safe and takes it out to his car, struggles with it, scrapes some of the paint off the car with the safe, and drives off.
He tried to make it look like it was a racial incident by sending that devil in hell letter. And ultimately, that letter hurt him too.
The FBI has a handwriting analysis unit at Quantico in their laboratory in Virginia. And they determined through samples obtained from him and the original letter he wrote to the press as being written by the same person. That person was Edmund Emmerich III, and no other.
Emmerich was ultimately indicted for an aggravated robbery, 2 counts of aggravated murder. They found him guilty of all the crimes and the specifications. Emmerich was sentenced to the maximum amount of time that he can. He would now be 97 years old the first time he comes up for parole. So I don't think Emmerich's ever getting out, and he shouldn't get out.
My brother was a good, law-abiding citizen who wanted to live a simple life and have a lot of friends. To have at his funeral over 700 people, that's a homage to Robert.
Frank was a stellar person. Everybody loved him, and really he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's all. I think that was hardest for his family to come to grips with. And I get asked all the time, what's the worst case? What's the whole most worry? You know, you can't rank tragedies. I mean, you can't, because everybody is important to somebody. And you got to work every case that way. You have to be dedicated to this. I won't go as far as saying it's a calling, but you certainly have to want to do this.
2 innocent men die violently for a few $100s of change money and destroy 2 families in the process. Justice? Maybe. Closure? Not possible. But I'll take justice if I can't find anything else. So, Doyle Burke. He'll take the justice. Like all American detectives do. On the next American Detective.
Fire is his thing. He was gonna erase his footsteps.
I realized he was a wolf in sheep's clothing.
I was shocked, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
A lot of murderers are emotional when they take a life. Not him, because he's cold as ice.
The road stretched endlessly into the Australian bush, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through miles of wild, unforgiving land. For many, the open highway symbolized freedom, a chance to hitch a ride, to meet strangers, to explore the raw beauty of New South Wales without the weight of schedules or maps. But by the late 1980s, this same stretch of wilderness carried whispers of unease. Rumors circulated among travelers and backpackers, people who vanished without a trace, packs of belongings found discarded, names that were spoken once at hostel bars but never again. The outback is both stunning and merciless. At night, the silence grows so deep it presses on the ears, broken only by the occasional shrill call of a bird or the rustling of some unseen animal. In this vast emptiness, a predator could hunt without fear of discovery, and screams could be swallowed by the trees. That was the world in which a man named Ivan Milat found his playground, and for years no one realized just how close they were to unspeakable horror. It began with disappearances. Young people, mostly foreigners, drawn to Australia's sunlit promise. They were backpackers, free spirits, hitchhikers chasing the road's adventure. Each carried with them their dreams, their journals, their lives ahead of them. Each trusted in the kindness of strangers. But someone out there saw them differently. Not as wanderers, not as travelers, but as prey. In the summer of 1989, two young women from Britain, Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, set out on an adventure across Australia. Their families back home in the UK believed they were safe, armed with youth and optimism. But after one final letter, silence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. They were simply gone, swallowed by the bush. Their disappearance echoed among fellow travelers, but police chalked it up to the unpredictability of backpacker life. Maybe the women had taken an unplanned detour. Maybe they had fallen in with new friends. No one suspected the truth, that deep inside Belanglo State Forest, their fate had already been sealed in blood. Belanglo, a sprawling woodland south of Sydney, was thick with eucalyptus and ghost gums. The trees grew so close together that they shut out the sun in patches, casting the ground into dim twilight. Trails twisted into nothingness. It was a place of both beauty and menace, where shadows seemed to linger too long. And there, beneath the silence of the trees, a killer had buried secrets, arid. Years before the world would know his name, Ivan Milat lived a quiet life to outsiders. A road worker from a large, tight-knit family, he blended into the landscape of working-class Australia. But beneath that exterior was something darker, an obsession with control, with violence, with domination. He collected weapons like others collect souvenirs. He practiced shooting. He knew the bush better than most, and he knew how to hide within it. By the early 1990s, the pattern of vanishing travelers grew harder to ignore. Germans, Britons, Australians, couples, and lone wanderers. Each one disappeared somewhere along the Hume Highway, the arterial road leading south from Sydney, cutting past Belanglo. Their faces stared out from missing posters in hostels and police stations. Yet there was never a body, never a clue to mark where they had gone. Until September 1992, two runners training in Belanglo made a gruesome discovery. Human remains, partially buried under sticks and leaves, bones exposed to the open air. At first glance, it was impossible to know who it had been. Nature had done its work. But as investigators combed the site, they found evidence of violence. Bullet holes, ropes, the unmistakable signs of a killing ground. Soon another body was found nearby. And with that, the silence of Belanglo cracked open. The forest had given up its first secrets, and investigators realized they were dealing not with accidents or wanderers gone astray, but with murder. The identification came swiftly. The remains belonged to Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, missing since 1989. Their families, who had clung to fading hope, were shattered by the confirmation. The details were nightmarish. Joanne had been stabbed repeatedly, her body bearing the marks of a frenzied attack. Caroline had been shot in the head, execution style. But the horror deepened when police realized Caroline's skull had multiple bullet wounds, not all fatal at once. It suggested something chilling. She had been used for target practice. The media exploded with the story. Two young women, murdered brutally, left to rot in the bush for years. For backpackers and travelers, fear spread like fire. Parents overseas begged their children to come home. Hostels buzzed with speculation. Who could do such a thing? Why Belanglo? Detectives faced a terrifying possibility. If the forest held 2 bodies, might it hold more? The search began. Officers swept through Belanglo with dogs, metal detectors, teams of forensic experts. The air grew heavier with each passing day, dread building as more evidence surfaced. In October 1993, a year after the first find, searchers uncovered more remains. 2 German backpackers, Gabo Neugebauer and Anja Habschied, who had vanished in 1991. Their skeletons told a gruesome story. Gabor had been shot multiple times, while Anja had been decapitated. Her head was never found. The brutality suggested sadism, not just murder. The forest was yielding bodies at a devastating pace. Not long after, another pair of remains was unearthed. James Gibson and Deborah Everest, both from Melbourne, both last seen hitchhiking in 1989. James had been stabbed savagely, wounds inflicted with rage. Deborah, too, bore the signs of violent assault. Their bones lay just meters apart, hidden for years under layers of forest debris. By this point, 7 bodies had been recovered. 7 young lives, ended in terror, their remains scattered within Belanglo. The press gave it a name, the Backpacker Murders, and the Australian public recoiled in shock. A serial killer was hunting the highways, preying on travelers, using the bush as his graveyard. Fear infected the culture. No longer was it safe to hitchhike. No longer could young wanderers trust the road. Detectives, now under immense pressure, pieced together patterns. Each victim had been hitchhiking. Each was last seen near the Hume Highway. Each suffered excessive violence, more than what was necessary to kill. It was not just murder. It was cruelty, ritualized and deliberate. The forest had been chosen carefully, isolated, impenetrable, a killer's stage. Whoever was behind these killings knew the bush intimately. He was patient, methodical, and terrifyingly confident. But who was he? For months, suspicion circled. Hundreds of tips poured in. Detectives studied vehicle registrations, combed through gun licenses, interviewed locals, and one name kept emerging from the shadows: Ivan Milat. Milat was known to police in small ways: minor offenses, weapons obsessions, a reputation for being tough, volatile. Colleagues recalled his fascination with guns, his habit of bragging about control. A girlfriend had once hinted at his violent streak. But he also had a disarming normalcy. He worked hard, came from a big family, blended into everyday life. Could this ordinary man really be the monster of Belanglo? The investigation deepened when a British backpacker named Paul Onions stepped forward. He had survived something no one else had: an encounter with Ivan Milat. In 1990, Paul had been hitchhiking south from Liverpool, England, on his Australian adventure. He accepted a ride from a man with a strong accent, dark hair, and a friendly demeanor. But as the road stretched on, unease crept in. The man spoke strangely, his eyes shifting, his questions unsettling. Then, suddenly, he pulled a gun. Paul bolted from the car, fleeing down the road as bullets cracked behind him. He escaped with his life, and with the memory of his attacker burned into his mind. When news of the backpacker murders spread, Paul recognized the pattern. He came forward, identifying the man who had nearly killed him. His statement gave investigators what they needed: a living witness who could point directly at Ivan Milat. The police closed in. Surveillance was set. Ivan was watched, his every move catalogued. His home was raided. Inside, detectives uncovered an arsenal of weapons: guns matching the bullets found in the forest, knives, ropes. Even more damning, they found belongings of the victims: clothing, cameras, camping gear. The evidence was overwhelming, but what chilled investigators most was not just the proof of murder. It was the banality of Ivan Milat's life outside of it. Neighbors described him as polite. Family saw him as a brother, a son, a worker. He had managed to kill 7 people, possibly more, and return home each night as though nothing had happened. The mask of normalcy had concealed a predator in plain sight. As police led Ivan Milat away in handcuffs, cameras flashing, the nation confronted the face of its nightmare. The backpacker killer was not a shadowy drifter, not an unknown phantom lurking in the bush. He was a man among them, one who had driven their roads, shared their pubs, lived within their neighborhoods. The terror lay not only in what he had done, but in how long he had gotten away with it. But this is only the beginning of the story. For behind every discovery in Belanglo, behind every testimony, lay the unimaginable suffering of the victims. They were more than names. They were vibrant lives cut short. Their murders revealed not just a killer's cruelty, but the fragility of trust on the open road. And as the trial loomed, the true extent of Ivan Milat's darkness would come into sharper, more horrifying focus. The walls of the interrogation room were bare, painted a dull off-white that seemed to close in around Ivan Milat as detectives stared at him across the table. The man at the center of Australia's most terrifying serial murder case sat with a calmness that unsettled even seasoned officers. His hands rested on the surface, thick and work-worn from years of road labor. His eyes, cold and unreadable, scanned the faces in front of him. There was no tremor in his voice, no flicker of remorse. To him, this was just another performance, another chance to manipulate. But the weight of the evidence was suffocating, and for the first time, the predator was cornered. As investigators pressed him with questions, Milat denied everything. He claimed innocence, shrugged off accusations, insisted that the belongings found in his house had been given to him or picked up innocently. He spun stories, constructed lies, all in an attempt to make the extraordinary seem mundane. But his denials collapsed under the avalanche of facts. The bullets that matched his gun, the ropes identical to those binding the victims, the camping gear linked to people who would never return home. Outside the police station, the world was watching. Reporters crowded against barricades, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Parents of missing travelers clutched photographs, eyes hollow from years of waiting. The case had transcended Australia. It had become international. Headlines screamed of the backpacker killer, the monster of Belanglo. Fear rippled across continents. For countless young wanderers, the idea of hitchhiking through foreign lands now carried the face of Ivan Milat. The trial would become one of the most haunting spectacles in Australian legal history. Courtrooms are usually places of procedure, of technical argument. But when Ivan Milat stood before the jury, the atmosphere shifted. This was not just a man on trial. It was the embodiment of terror itself, the ghost that haunted 7 graves in Belanglo. The prosecution laid out its case with meticulous precision, reconstructing each murder through forensic evidence, survivor testimony, and Milat's own arrogance. Paul Onions, the British backpacker who had escaped Ivan's gunfire years earlier, became the prosecution's living proof. When he entered the courtroom, the silence was palpable. Every eye turned toward him as he pointed across the room at the man who had once offered him a ride and then tried to end his life. His testimony was steady, his memory sharp. He described the ride, the sudden shift in atmosphere, the gun, the moment of terror when he ran for his life along a lonely Australian road. The jury listened, transfixed. In that moment, the monster was not a myth. It was sitting at the defense table. The forensic pathologists described the victim's final moments with clinical detail that shook even hardened listeners. Photographs were displayed, skeletal remains that bore the cruel marks of Milat's violence. Bullet holes in skulls, knife wounds in rib cages, the shocking absence of Anya Habshid's head. The medical examiners spoke of precision and cruelty, of torture inflicted with deliberation. The air in the courtroom grew heavy, a suffocating silence as the images imprinted themselves into the minds of the jury. But what horrified the public most was not just the scale of Milat's crimes, it was the banality of his mask. Witness after witness described him as cheerful, hard-working, a man who laughed easily, who loved his family. Neighbors were stunned. How could the man they waved to every morning, the man who borrowed tools and talked about the weather, be capable of such unimaginable horror? The contradiction was unbearable. It forced people to confront the darkest possibility, that evil does not always lurk in shadows. Sometimes it smiles at you in daylight. The prosecution painted Milat as a predator who hunted for sport, who turned human suffering into entertainment. They described how he selected his victims, lured them into his vehicle with the promise of safety, then revealed his arsenal of weapons. They spoke of control, domination, the satisfaction of power he felt as young travelers realized too late that they had stepped into a nightmare. He knew the bush would swallow their screams. He knew the roads offered endless opportunities, and he relished it. The defense tried to counter, to cast doubt, to suggest alternative suspects. They hinted at the possibility that others might have been involved, that Ivan was a scapegoat for a wider circle of violence. They pointed to the vastness of the bush, the difficulty of pinning exact times of death. They spoke of circumstantial evidence, of coincidences, but every word fell against the mountain of proof. The jury was not swayed by smoke and mirrors. The truth was too stark, too undeniable. As the trial stretched on, the families of the victims sat in grim silence. Mothers clutched rosaries. Fathers stared blankly at the man accused of destroying their worlds. Siblings wept quietly as they listened to the brutal details of their loved ones' final hours. Each testimony ripped open wounds that would never heal. For them, the courtroom was not a place of justice. It was a place of agony, where the last moments of their sons and daughters were dissected in chilling detail. And yet, amid the horror, there was resilience. Parents spoke of their children's dreams, of the lives they had wanted to build. Friends remembered their laughter, their spirit of adventure. These memories stood in defiance of Ivan Milat's cruelty. He could bury their bodies, but he could not erase who they were. In the telling of their stories, the victims lived again, if only in fragments of memory. As the final days of the trial approached, tension gripped the nation. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, waiting for the verdict that would decide whether the monster of Belanglo would walk free or spend the rest of his days behind bars. Inside, the jury filed back into the room, their faces solemn, their eyes heavy with the burden of judgment. One by one, the charges were read. 7 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder. The jury's response was clear, unwavering. Guilty. 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 Each word fell like a hammer, echoing through the room, sealing even Milat's fate. In that moment, a collective breath seemed to release across Australia. Relief mingled with sorrow. The killer was caught, but nothing could return the 7 young lives stolen from the world. The courtroom erupted in tears, of grief, of rage, of closure that never truly closes. The families clung to each other, knowing that justice had been served, even if it could never heal the wound. The judge, his voice steady but firm, delivered the sentence. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Ivan Milat would die behind bars, his freedom stripped as permanently as he had stripped freedom from his victims. The words were both a punishment and a safeguard, a promise to the public that this man would never again stalk the roads of New South Wales. But even as he was led away, Milat remained defiant. He smirked. He shook his head. He refused to admit guilt. In his mind, he had not been defeated. He carried his secrets with him into prison walls, leaving unanswered questions to torment investigators and families alike. How many others had there been? Were there more graves in Belanglo, more victims who had never been found? His silence ensured the shadows of doubt would linger long after the verdict. For the world outside, the case left scars. Backpacking through Australia would never again feel the same. Hitchhiking, once a symbol of youthful adventure, now carried the echo of Milat's crimes. Belanglo State Forest, once just another patch of wilderness, became a place of pilgrimage for the curious and the haunted, a forest where the trees seemed to remember. Tourists avoided it, locals whispered about it, and the mere mention of its name conjured visions of horror. And yet the story was not finished. For behind the prison walls, Ivan Milat remained a figure of fascination and dread. Journalists sought interviews. Criminologists studied his methods. Psychologists debated what twisted his mind into such darkness. But no one could extract the full truth, because Ivan reveled in his power to withhold it. He had taken lives, and now he took answers, hoarding them like trophies only he could touch. Even in captivity, his shadow stretched across the land. Letters smuggled from his cell carried cryptic messages, taunts, refusals to confess. His family defended him publicly, refusing to believe he was capable of such monstrosities, fueling conspiracy theories that others were to blame. Supporters sent him mail, some twisted admirers fascinated by his infamy. The legend of the backpacker killer grew, a grotesque monument to the human capacity for cruelty. But while Ivan clung to his illusions of power, the families of the victims clung to something stronger: remembrance. They gathered at memorials, spoke their children's names aloud, refused to let their memories be reduced to statistics in a court file. In vigils lit by candlelight, faces glowed with grief and determination. They would not let the forest or the killer define who their children had been. They reclaimed their stories, piece by fragile piece, and yet, beneath the surface, one chilling truth remained. For every body that had been found in Belanglo, there might be others still hidden in the vast wilderness of Australia. The possibility gnawed at detectives, haunted by the thought that Milat's sadism had stretched beyond the 7 names etched into the record. The forest had given up its secrets before. It could do so again. The heavy iron doors of Goulburn's Supermax prison slammed shut behind Ivan Milat, their echo rolling through the corridors like a verdict set in stone. Inside, the most dangerous men in Australia were locked away, but even among murderers, Milat carried a singular infamy. Guards watched him closely. Fellow inmates eyed him with a mix of fascination and fear. He was no ordinary criminal. He was the face of a nation's nightmare. Yet as days turned into months, Milat settled into prison life with unnerving composure, never admitting guilt, never conceding an inch of his carefully constructed facade. From his cell, he became a ghostly presence in the public consciousness. Newspapers published sketches of him sitting casually, hair combed neatly, a slight grin curling his lips, as though none of it, the murders, the trial, the shattered families, truly mattered. That smirk became a symbol of his defiance, a refusal to bend under the weight of his crimes. He relished the notoriety, wrote letters to journalists, entertained visitors who sought to unravel his mind. Each correspondence was another performance, a chance to maintain control even from behind bars. The question that tormented investigators lingered. Was Ivan Milat truly finished when they caught him? Or had he killed more than the 7 victims discovered in Belanglo? The wilderness of Australia is vast, a labyrinth of forests, deserts, and roads that vanish into nothing. Detectives pored over missing persons reports from the 1970s and 80s, faces of young travelers who had vanished without explanation. Patterns began to emerge, disappearances that mirrored Milat's method, bodies never recovered, families still waiting for answers. One of the most chilling speculations centered on the case of Karen Rowland, a 20-year-old woman who disappeared in 1971 while hitchhiking. Her remains were later found near Canberra, her body showing signs of violence eerily similar to those inflicted on Milat's known victims. Other names followed. Young men and women lost on highways, their last known journeys overlapping with the regions where Milat had lived or worked. Each case deepened the suspicion that the 7 bodies in Belanglo were only part of a larger tapestry of death. But Milat refused to speak. He denied everything, not only the possibility of additional victims, but even the murders for which he had been convicted. In interviews, he projected arrogance, scoffing at police theories, ridiculing their evidence. He insisted he had been framed, that the government and media had conspired to pin the murders on him. The audacity of his lies both enraged and fascinated the public. People wondered if his silence was a calculated cruelty, a way to maintain power by leaving families trapped in uncertainty. Inside prison, his defiance expressed itself in darker ways. He staged hunger strikes, demanding radios, televisions, better conditions. When denied, he escalated his rebellion. In one notorious incident, he smuggled a blade into his cell and sliced his own hand in an attempt to force transfer to a hospital. The act was not of desperation, but of manipulation, a performance to remind everyone that he could still create chaos. Guards restrained him, bandaged him, returned him to his cell. But the message was clear. Even Milat was not done playing games. The forest of Belanglo, however, refused to fade from memory. Tourists began to visit, drawn morbidly to the sight of horror. Reporters filmed specials among the twisted trees. Hikers whispered of a sinister atmosphere, as though the forest itself bore witness to the screams that had once filled its air. Families of the victims hated these pilgrimages, but they understood the magnetism. Belanglo had become a place where tragedy and mystery intertwined, a reminder of what one man's cruelty could carve into the land. And as years passed, young travelers continued to vanish across Australia, sometimes under circumstances disturbingly similar to Milat's crimes. Each case reignited speculation. Had he acted alone, or had he inspired copycats? Was it possible that others in his orbit, family, friends, acquaintances, had shared his twisted desires? Some investigators were convinced Milat had not been the only hand behind the backpacker murders, though concrete evidence remained elusive. The suspicion fell particularly on his brothers, men who had grown up with him, who shared his environment, his knowledge of the bush. But none were ever charged, and the mystery of whether Ivan had accomplices became another unanswered question in a saga full of them. Meanwhile, the families of his known victims carried their grief into the new millennium. Birthdays came and went, anniversaries passed, lives moved forward with empty chairs at every gathering. Some parents died before ever seeing justice served in its fullest form. Others dedicated themselves to keeping their children's memories alive, speaking at public events, urging safety for travelers, turning tragedy into warnings for others. Their voices carried a quiet power, transforming unspeakable loss into a determination that no one else should endure what they had. In contrast, Milat's voice grew louder in its absurdity. He filed endless appeals, each one rejected. He attempted to sue prison authorities for petty grievances. He boasted in letters that he would outlast his captors, that he would never confess. It was as if he fed on the very outrage he inspired, sustaining himself on the knowledge that people still spoke his name. He had built his legacy on fear, and he was determined to keep it alive. Yet time is relentless, even for monsters. By the late 2010s, Milat's health began to deteriorate. The years of confinement, the stress of endless battles with the system, and the simple inevitability of age caught up with him. He was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, an illness as merciless as the crimes he had committed. The once defiant killer found himself weakened, frail, his body collapsing even as his arrogance persisted. When news of his illness reached the public, reactions were divided. Some felt satisfaction, a grim sense of justice that nature itself had sentenced him to a painful end. Others felt cheated, fearing he would die with his secrets intact, taking the answers to countless mysteries with him to the grave. Families of other missing travelers pleaded for him to confess, to offer closure before it was too late. They wrote letters, appealed through the media, begged him to unburden himself. But Milat refused. He smiled, he smirked, he insisted he had nothing to say. His silence became his final cruelty. In the hospital ward where he spent his last months, guards stood watch around the clock. The once feared predator now lay bedridden, tubes feeding him, his body shrinking. Yet even in weakness, he clung to control, refusing to acknowledge guilt, refusing to show remorse. The end came on October 27, 2019, when Ivan Milat drew his final breath. His death was announced with blunt simplicity, but its impact rippled through the nation. For some, it was closure. For others, it was frustration, a chapter closed without the truth fully revealed. As his body was cremated in secrecy, the debate over his legacy burned fiercely. Was he solely responsible for the 7 confirmed murders, or had he claimed many more lives? Did he act entirely alone, or were there others who had never faced justice? These questions remain suspended in uncertainty, haunting the families of the missing, haunting the nation that still cannot quite comprehend how one man could wreak such devastation. And yet, beneath the speculation and the darkness, there remains one undeniable truth. The victims. Caroline Clark, Joanne Walters, Gabor Neugebauer, Anya Habshid, James Gibson, Deborah Everest, and Simone Schmidl. 7 names carved into history by one man's violence. 7 stories cut short but not forgotten. Their memory lives in the warnings given to young travelers, in the whispered cautions at hostels, in the memorials left at Belanglo's edge. They became more than victims. They became symbols of the fragile line between trust and danger, freedom and fear. The story of Ivan Milat does not end with his death. It lingers in the forest where bones were hidden, in the cracked voices of families who still wait for answers, in the cultural memory of a nation scarred by his crimes. It lingers in every backpacker who steps onto a highway with thumb extended, in every parent who wonders if adventure is worth the risk. The shadow of the backpacker murders stretches far beyond the man himself. It is a shadow cast across innocence, across wanderlust, across the simple human desire to explore. And somewhere in the rustling leaves of Belanglo, in the silence that settles when night falls and the moon casts its cold light through the trees, it feels as if the forest remembers, as if it waits, holding secrets that may never be uncovered, bearing silent witness to horrors that transformed it forever. The news of Ivan Milat's death spread quickly, flashing across television screens and splashing over headlines as though the nation had been holding its breath for years. For some, it felt like the closing of a nightmare, a final chapter sealed by mortality itself. But for others, his death only deepened the silence. With him went secrets that no jury had ever heard, no detective had ever uncovered. The questions still hung heavy in the air. How many had he killed, and what horrors remained buried in the vast wilderness of Australia? In the weeks after his passing, the country seemed to relive the terror all over again. Talkback radio filled with callers sharing stories, some recalling their youthful days hitchhiking on the Hume Highway, others confessing close encounters with men who might have been him. Backpackers who had crossed paths with Milat in the late 80s called in with voices trembling, remembering his piercing stare, his strange questions, the unsettling way he seemed to measure them. Survivors of near misses like Paul Onions were thrust once more into the spotlight, their warnings echoing with renewed urgency. The ghost of Milat had not vanished with his body. It still lingered, in memory and in fear. The forest of Belanglo grew heavier in the public imagination, its name whispered with unease. Some described a suffocating silence there, an unnatural stillness as though the land itself bore grief. Tourists, drawn by a morbid fascination, arrived in small numbers, their footsteps crunching over soil that had hidden unspeakable cruelty. Some left flowers at makeshift memorials, their petals bright against the dark earth. Others came seeking the thrill of standing where evil had walked, staring into the woods with a mix of dread and disbelief. For the families of the victims, these visits felt like an intrusion, but also a reminder that their children had not been forgotten. The Australian media dissected Milat's life endlessly. Documentaries replayed grainy footage of his arrest, interviews with detectives, court sketches of his impassive face. True crime programs pored over every detail, his upbringing, his weapons, his patterns. But beyond the facts, there was an unshakable fascination with the psychology of the man. What had shaped him into a predator? Was he born with darkness coiled inside, or had it been nurtured in the rough edges of his childhood? Experts debated endlessly, but the answers remained elusive, swallowed with him into the grave. What emerged more clearly was the cultural scar he left behind. The backpacker murders reshaped the very idea of travel in Australia. In the years after the case, hostels began posting warnings, advising against hitchhiking, urging travelers to register their movements. Parents overseas grew reluctant to let their children wander the highways. What had once been a symbol of carefree adventure, the open road, the lifted thumb, became entangled with fear. The innocence of travel was gone, replaced by caution, suspicion, and the shadow of Milat's cruelty. But the fascination with Milat also revealed something darker about society itself, a grim attraction to evil. Even from prison, his story sold papers, drew viewers, inspired books and documentaries. People leaned forward to hear the grisly details, to imagine the terror of being alone with him on a deserted road. Psychologists called it a paradox, the fear of violence coupled with the need to confront it, to stare into the abyss from a safe distance. Milat, in his arrogance, thrived on this attention, becoming a grotesque celebrity whose name would echo long after his death. And yet, amid the obsession with the killer, the voices of the victims' families demanded to be heard. They spoke of their daughters and sons not as headlines, but as people. Caroline Clark, with her bright laughter and passion for adventure. Joanne Walters, kind-hearted and determined, with dreams of helping others. Gabor and Anya, two young Germans in love, chasing the wide horizons of Australia together. James and Deborah, best friends full of hope. Simone Schmiedel, filled with curiosity about the world beyond her hometown. Each name was a life cut short, each story a reminder that this was not simply about a killer's cruelty, but about stolen futures. The pain of the families never faded. Some found a kind of strength in speaking out, turning grief into advocacy. They warned other travelers, pushed for safety campaigns, urged governments to take missing persons cases seriously. Their voices, raw with sorrow, carried more weight than any documentary. They embodied resilience in the face of the unimaginable, refusing to let their children be remembered only as victims. Still, the questions refused to rest. In police archives, stacks of cold cases from the 70s and 80s carried eerie similarities to Milat's methods. Young men found shot in the head, women stabbed repeatedly, hitchhikers who vanished without a trace along roads where Milat often drove. Detectives speculated quietly, haunted by the thought that Belanglo might not be the only graveyard he had used. But with Milat dead, and without confessions, the evidence remained circumstantial, frustratingly incomplete. The mystery of whether he acted alone also gnawed at the public. His brothers, part of the large and tight-knit Milat family, were scrutinized for years. Some had criminal records of their own, brushes with the law, reputations for violence. Could they have helped? Could the scale of the murders suggest more than one hand at work? Officially, nothing was proven. But unofficially, suspicion lingered, feeding conspiracy theories that the full truth had never come out. The Milat name became a curse, a shadow that clung to his relatives, even those innocent of any crime. As years passed, the story of Ivan Milat transformed into something larger than crime alone. It became a cautionary tale about trust, about vulnerability, about the fragility of safety in a vast and indifferent world. It revealed the dangers of blind faith in strangers, the risks hidden in the freedom of the open road. For a generation, it redefined the meaning of adventure, replacing carefree innocence with wary vigilance. Even now, decades after the murders, Belanglo remains a place heavy with meaning. At its edge stands a sign, ordinary, weathered, marking the entrance. Beyond it, the road snakes into the trees, shadows stretching long across the ground. For those who know its history, every rustle of leaves feels loaded, every bird call tinged with unease. People say the forest is cursed, that it remembers. But in truth, it is not the land itself that carries the darkness. It is the memory of what one man chose to do there, and the lives he stole from it. And so the legend of the backpacker murders endures. Not a story of closure, not even a story of justice, but a story of loss, of fear, and of unanswered questions that will haunt Australia for generations. The killer is gone, but his shadow lingers, stretching across time, across memory, across every road where a traveler dares to trust the wrong stranger. The echo of the backpacker murders did not stop at the borders of Australia. It thundered across oceans, reaching every corner of the globe where young people dreamed of travel. In Britain, Germany, and beyond, the names of the victims became whispered warnings. Parents sat their children down at dinner tables, their voices trembling as they pleaded, "Be careful, don't trust strangers, the world is not as safe as it seems." The dream of the great Australian adventure. Long stretches of open highway, endless sky, chance encounters with friendly locals, had been fractured by the image of a man with a gun, a grin, and a hunger for domination. Hostels, once lively crossroads of wanderers, changed their tone. Posters went up, urging travelers not to hitchhike, to check in regularly, to move in groups. Some owners kept behind the counter a scrapbook of missing posters, grim reminders that the road was not just a ribbon of freedom, but also a predator's trap. Backpackers, once carefree, now cast suspicious glances at the cars that slowed down to offer a lift. Every driver became a possible danger. The innocence of adventure had been stolen, and Ivan Milat's shadow stretched over every road. Yet, at the same time, fascination deepened. True crime magazines published special editions, bookstores filled with paperbacks bearing Milat's face on the cover, his story dissected in lurid detail. Television crews retraced the steps of the victims, filming in Belanglo's twisted paths, their voices hushed as though afraid to wake the ghosts. Ratings soared. People leaned forward in living rooms, horrified and captivated, unable to look away. Why do we return again and again to the stories of monsters? Why does fear magnetize us? Some say it is because we want to understand, to guard ourselves against what lurks in the dark. Others believe it is because evil, when revealed in human form, shocks us into confronting the fragile balance of our own lives. Even Milat was no myth. He was a man who could have sat beside you in a pub, offered you a lift on a hot afternoon, shared a joke, and then driven you into the abyss. The thought alone was enough to chill blood. and yet people wanted to hear it told again and again. Journalists who covered the trial spoke of the eerie feeling of being in his presence. He would sit in the dock, composed, even amused, as if the proceedings were theater and he the star performer. Reporters wrote of his smirk, his calm defiance, the unnerving way his eyes flickered with amusement as families wept. They described the contrast between the banality of his appearance, a man in a simple shirt, hair combed, posture relaxed, and the monstrousness of what he had done. That contradiction, that unsettling duality, became the crux of his legend. Evil did not always look like a beast. Sometimes it looked like a neighbor. Psychologists and criminologists debated endlessly. Was Milat a psychopath, born without empathy, driven only by control and thrill? Or was he shaped by circumstance, by a strict, chaotic upbringing in a sprawling family where violence simmered just beneath the surface? His family members described a boy who grew into a man obsessed with weapons, who sought dominance, who thrived on intimidation. But explanations never satisfied the deeper hunger to know why. The truth was perhaps more chilling than any theory. Sometimes there is no why. Sometimes the darkness is simply there, waiting for a chance to take hold. As the years rolled on, the backpacker murders continued to cast their spell on Australian culture. The Langlo Forest became more than a place. It became a symbol. For some, it was cursed, haunted by the restless spirits of the victims. For others, it was sacred ground, a place of mourning. Motorists driving past the turnoff shivered, refusing to enter. Hikers who braved its paths reported a heaviness in the air, as though unseen eyes watched from the shadows. Belanglo had been transformed forever, not by nature, but by what one man had chosen to do within it. And while Milat remained locked away, his influence seeped outward. Other killers in Australia and beyond cited him, inspired by his infamy, their crimes echoing his. Police, criminologists, and journalists began to speak of the Milat effect, the way his legend emboldened the disturbed, how his story turned murder into spectacle. It was proof of a dangerous paradox. The more we shone light on him, the longer his shadow grew. But even in the depths of fascination, grief remained raw for those who had lost the most. Families continued to gather, to hold vigils, to tell stories. They spoke of laughter, of dreams, of birthdays missed. They carried photographs faded at the edges, clung to trinkets their children had touched. Every year that passed without them was a wound reopened, a reminder that justice could punish a man, but never bring back the stolen future. In their eyes, the world had been divided in two, before Milat and after Milat. The government, pressured by the public's fear, introduced reforms. Hitchhiking became discouraged, road safety campaigns flourished, and missing persons protocols were strengthened. Law enforcement invested in better forensic methods, vowing that no predator would slip through the cracks so easily again. Yet for all the progress, the chilling reality remained. Even Milat had operated for years, hiding in plain sight, and no system had stopped him until it was too late. Internationally, the backpacker murders became a symbol of vulnerability. Travel guides began to warn against hitchhiking in Australia. Parents in Europe and America hesitated before buying tickets for their children. For decades, whispers of Milat lingered in hostels across continents. Young travelers swapping stories late into the night, nervously laughing as they spoke of the monster who stalked the highways. He became part of backpacker folklore, a name passed on like a cautionary tale. In his cell, Milat reveled in this twisted fame. Letters poured in, some from outraged strangers, some from admirers drawn to his notoriety. He responded to a select few, his words smug, cryptic, taunting. He maintained his innocence, even as he clung to the attention his crimes brought him. To him, denial was not just a shield, It was a weapon. By refusing to confess, he denied closure to the families, forcing them to live with the torment of never knowing the full truth. His silence was a cruelty as sharp as any blade, and yet time marched on, unyielding. The man who once stalked the forests and highways with arrogance grew frail, diminished by illness. The predator became a patient. The gunman became a frail shadow tethered to hospital machines. But even as cancer gnawed at his body, his spirit of defiance remained. To his final breath, he refused to admit guilt. To his final moment, he clung to control, carrying his secrets into the grave. When he died, some cheered, others wept, and many simply sat in silence. His passing did not feel like closure, but like an unfinished sentence. The mystery remained. How many more might have died at his hands? How many families might still live in ignorance of his cruelty? The grave closed over him, but the darkness he unleashed did not. Because Ivan Milat was never just one man. He became a mirror of fear itself, a reminder of how thin the line is between safety and danger, trust and betrayal. His crimes transformed the way a nation viewed its wilderness, its roads, its strangers. His shadow stretched beyond his lifetime, beyond his forest, beyond his prison cell, and it remains, lingering in every whispered warning, every cautionary tale, every traveler who pauses before stepping into a stranger's car. Long after the prison doors closed on Ivan Milat, detectives still found themselves drawn back to the case files, flipping through photographs of missing faces, maps marked with red pins, reports of last sightings. For them, the story never ended with a guilty verdict. There was an ache, a gnawing certainty that the 7 bodies in Belanglo were not the full measure of his crimes. Too many names still floated in the archives, too many unexplained vanishings along roads where Milat once drove. Each file was a ghost, whispering the possibility that more lay hidden beneath the soil of Australia's endless wilderness. Some detectives spoke openly of their suspicion. They believed Milat's killing career stretched back far earlier than the late 1980s. They traced his movements as a young man, noting disappearances that coincided with jobs he held, towns where he had worked, roads he had frequented. The pattern was chilling. Women who vanished near Canberra in the 70s, a teenager whose remains were discovered in bushland, wounds that bore Milat's signature brutality. The shadows of his violence seemed to reach further than anyone dared to admit. But proof was elusive. The bush is merciless to evidence, swallowing it whole. Bones bleach in the sun, clothing disintegrates, animals scatter remains. Decades later, what could have been crucial clues are reduced to fragments, mute and indecipherable. Detectives walked through forests with ground-penetrating equipment, dogs sniffing at the air, but the land kept its silence. The answers lay somewhere out there, under roots and earth, guarded by the vastness of the wild. For the families of the still missing, Milat's death was another kind of prison. They had hoped, however faintly, that illness might soften his pride, that at the end he would break, confess, give them something. But he went to the grave with his lips sealed, smirking at their pain. His refusal was not simply denial. It was domination, a final act of control. He knew that withholding the truth would keep him alive in their torment, even after death. And that, perhaps, was his cruelest legacy. The speculation extended to his family. The Milats were a sprawling clan, tightly knit, fiercely protective of one another. They had grown up together in a strict and often violent household, siblings bound by loyalty and silence. Investigators wondered, could Ivan really have acted alone? His crimes required planning, secrecy, transportation, disposal. Was it possible that brothers, cousins, someone in that vast family had known, had helped, had stayed silent to protect their own? Rumors circulated for years, fueled by inconsistencies and coincidences. Some of his brothers had histories of violence themselves. brushes with the law that hinted at darker tendencies. In whispered conversations, locals speculated about a pact of silence within the family. But whispers are not evidence. No charges were ever brought against them. Still, the suspicion never died. It clung to the Milat name, turning it into a symbol of dread. Children who bore that surname grew up under its shadow, some changing their identities, others defiantly carrying it like a burden they did not ask for. Meanwhile, Belanglo itself became something more than a forest. It became a wound in the landscape, a scar carved into the collective memory of a nation. People told stories of strange feelings there, of oppressive silence, of unease that crept up the spine. Some swore they heard whispers on the wind. Others claimed to see shapes flicker between the trees. Rational minds dismissed it as imagination, but those who had walked the trails alone spoke of the same thing, a sense that the place was watching. To step into Belanglo was to step into the presence of ghosts. Memorials sprang up at the edges, simple plaques, flowers, handwritten notes left by strangers who felt compelled to honor lives stolen there. Travelers came quietly, some with backpacks slung over their shoulders, pausing in silence to pay respect. The forest had become a paradox, both feared and revered, avoided by many yet drawn to by others who sought to confront its darkness. And beyond Australia, the case continued to ripple. In hostels across Europe, young travelers swapped stories late into the night, the name Milat spoken in hushed tones. He became part of backpacker folklore, a cautionary tale retold in different languages, woven into the culture of travel itself. For some, the story was enough to deter them from hitchhiking forever. For others, it became an almost reckless badge of courage, to walk the highways despite the fear, to prove they would not be broken by the specter of one man's evil. But the truth was that Milat had broken something larger than the safety of a highway. He had broken trust, trust between strangers, trust in the road, trust in the idea that adventure could be innocent. He had weaponized kindness, offering rides, feigning hospitality, and turned it into a trap. That betrayal of trust was perhaps his most corrosive crime, one that left scars on generations of travelers long after his own death. Criminologists studied him as though dissecting a riddle. They described him as methodical, organized, capable of sustaining a double life for years without suspicion. He was not the madman screaming in the night. He was the calm driver who smiled as he asked where you were headed. He embodied the predator who hides in plain sight, the one we least expect. His ability to mask his violence beneath ordinary manners was what made him terrifying, because it meant anyone, anywhere, could be like him, invisible until it was too late. In classrooms and training facilities, his case became a lesson. Police recruits studied the timeline, forensic students examined the evidence, psychologists debated his mind. He became a textbook example of the hidden predator, a case that would shape the future of investigations. But outside the walls of academia, he remained something darker, a symbol of cruelty without remorse, a reminder that monsters are not just stories told around campfires. They walk among us, smiling. Even now, when travelers gather and talk of dangers, his name surfaces. When parents speak of caution, his story is retold. When journalists speak of Australia's dark chapters, Belanglo rises like a ghost from the earth. Time has passed. Decades have dulled the immediacy of fear, but the legend has not died. It waits, crouched in the spaces between memory and myth, reminding us that one man's cruelty can alter the course of a culture, a country, even the way strangers see each other on an empty road. And as night falls over Belanglo, the trees whisper in the wind. The forest stands in silence, the soil still holding secrets. Perhaps there are bones yet undiscovered, stories untold, lives unaccounted for. Perhaps Milat's legacy is not just in what we know, but in what we never will. That uncertainty, that gnawing absence of truth, is the real terror. One that no trial, no verdict, no prison sentence can erase. The years after Ivan Milat's death did not erase his presence. If anything, his absence made him more spectral, a figure who seemed to drift like smoke across Australia's collective memory. The man was gone, but the shadow remained, cast over highways, over forests, over every whispered warning that parents passed down to their children. His crimes became part of the language of fear, invoked as shorthand for betrayal and cruelty, a reminder that danger does not always arrive with snarling teeth, but sometimes with a smile and an open car door. Belanglo State Forest stood as the most enduring monument to his violence. The ground itself felt heavy, as though carrying the weight of the 7 young lives buried there. Visitors described a hush that settled over them as they entered, a silence deeper than nature alone. Some spoke of feeling watched, of turning their heads to glimpses of movement that vanished in the corner of their eyes. The rational explanation was unease, imagination magnified by knowledge. But many left convinced the forest remembered. In the years since, Belanglo became a place where stories multiplied. Some came to pay respects, laying flowers at makeshift memorials. Others came out of morbid curiosity, filming shaky videos that would later circulate online, breathing new life into the legend. Urban explorers crept through its paths at night, whispering nervously as they retraced the final steps of Milat's victims. And always, the same feeling returned. This was not just a forest anymore. It was a graveyard of trust, a shrine to the darkness one man had chosen to create. But there was another legacy, one less visible but equally haunting: the way the case transformed human behavior. Hitchhiking, once a symbol of freedom, was stained forever. Parents across the world, not just in Australia, forbade it with urgency. Travelers became more cautious, more suspicious, more guarded. A culture that once celebrated spontaneity now carried fear stitched into its fabric. Milat had killed not only people, but also a way of life, an innocence that would never return. And yet, from that same darkness, something else emerged: resilience. Families of the victims refused to let their children's names dissolve into the identity of backpacker murder victims. They told stories of who they had been: Caroline with her radiant voice, Joanne with her determination, Gabor and Anya with their love, James and Deborah with their friendship, Simone with her adventurous heart. They brought these fragments into the light, reclaiming their children from the shadow of Milat's violence. They insisted the world remember them not as statistics, but as people who had lived, dreamed, and deserved futures. Their courage stood as a counterpoint to Milat's cruelty. While he reveled in withholding, in controlling, in destroying, they spoke with tenderness, with pain, with defiance. They turned grief into warnings, into campaigns for safety, into the act of remembrance. Their voices carried more strength than his smirk ever could, because while he represented the collapse of trust, they represented the refusal to surrender to despair. Still, the unanswered questions gnawed at the edges of closure. Detectives retired with a sense of incompletion, haunted by the belief that other names belonged on the list of his victims. Families of the missing stared at empty chairs, wondering if Milat had stolen their loved ones too. His silence ensured that these wounds would remain open, festering in the space between what was known and what could never be proven. That was his final cruelty: the power of absence, of secrets buried beyond reach. Even now, criminologists dissect his case. Students read his name in textbooks. Journalists revisit the story. Each retelling reopens the horror, each detail still carrying the capacity to shock. because even Milat was not just a killer. He was a mirror, reflecting the fragility of trust, the thin line between freedom and danger. His story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that monsters are not creatures of nightmare, but people who walk beside us, unnoticed, until they choose to reveal themselves. The global fascination endures. Documentaries are streamed, podcasts whispered into headphones late at night, books printed with his face staring out from the cover. Belanglo becomes a backdrop for crime shows, its trees captured in haunting shots. Even in death, Milat remains alive in the culture of fear. His name lingers not just as history, but as a warning. And yet, when we strip away the headlines, the myth-making, the endless fascination, what remains are 7 stolen lives. 7 young people who trusted the world enough to walk its highways, who believed in adventure, who never returned home. Their voices were silenced, but their presence lingers in every candle lit at a vigil, in every parent's caution, in every traveler's pause before stepping into a stranger's car. They remain the truest legacy of this story, not the man who destroyed, but the lives that deserve to be remembered. Night settles over Belanglo, the wind weaving through the branches, the forest holding its silence. The shadows grow long, the air thick with memory. And somewhere, in the hush between rustling leaves, you can almost hear it. The echo of footsteps that never returned, the voices cut off too soon, the warning that hums beneath the surface of the land. The backpacker murders are not just a story of the past, they are a reminder etched into the present, a haunting that endures, whispering to every traveler who dares the road. Trust is fragile. Freedom carries risks, and sometimes the darkest monsters wear the most ordinary faces.